At the end of the book of Ruth, she has everything restored, doesn't she? It talks in the last few verses about Naomi's joy at the birth of the son of Boaz and Ruth. His name, in English, they say it's Obed, which is like the ugliest name ever. But it is the same name as the beginning of what in English we call Obadiah, but in Hebrew always sounds much better, Ovadia, which means my servant, or Oved, so my servant. And the women in town are so impressed with this whole story and how it's worked out for Naomi. They actually say, your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons has given him birth. And in a very real symbolic way, in the last few verses of the book of Ruth, this woman who had no children left, no grandchildren, no future really, except to return to her heritage, has been provided with a lovely daughter, son-in-law, and a lovely baby. And he becomes known as Naomi's baby. Very nice. So it's the faithfulness of God to Naomi and in her situation is one of the key things. Number 2, the kindness shown throughout the book. This is a book of kind actions. People are nice to each other. They think about others. They don't think about themselves for a long time. They're busy doing what they should be doing and also being generous. This is true about each character, and we could go through it. But just realize that one of the messages is kindness benefits everybody. Everybody. Number 3, the willingness to obey is central. The willingness to obey. Ruth is willing to adopt and obey Naomi as her mother. She says, I'm not going back to my family in Moab. I'm with you. I'm with you, Naomi. She is willing to obey what Naomi says. And remember, Ruth puts herself out on a limb, and we can talk about that another time. But Naomi tells Ruth to go and do something that I know a lot of people find shocking, but actually was a solid part of what was permissible in that day, which was to go to someone who had the responsibility to take care of her and say, please take care of her. She followed Naomi's instruction to the letter. So her willingness to obey was one of the keys, and Boaz was willing to obey the rules in Deuteronomy 22, I believe it is, where as a landowner and as owner of a barley harvest of substantial means, he allowed widows, orphans, aliens or foreigners, and poor to go in after the harvest had been done and pick up what was left over. A process that we know of as gleaning, although we've never seen people glean probably. But because he is obedient, and once again, he is kind and considerate, he not only allows Ruth to do this, he says, listen, workers, and there's probably both men and women there. It's not just men working in the fields. Whoever needs to work in the fields is working in the fields. And Boaz says, listen, give her a little extra. Give her a little extra. That'd be great. You should give her a little extra. Not watch to make sure she doesn't steal it all. That would be the opposite of being kind and the opposite of what Boaz says. They both are willing to obey. Ruth is willing to obey Naomi, and Boaz is willing to obey the rules that God put into effect. The climax of the book, although the center verse of this whole book is the following verse. The Lord bless him, says Naomi, talking about Boaz, to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. In other words, to us women and to his relatives that have already died. She added to Ruth, that man is our close relative. He's one of our kinsmen redeemers. He is a close relative that is charged with the responsibility of taking care of us. And he's willing to accept the responsibility. He's willing to obey the rules that God set up. Once again, there's a guy in here who has the opportunity to do this. He is just as close of a relative, if not closer. He says thanks, but no thanks. And it turns out he wants the land, but he doesn't want Ruth. And Boaz wants both. And he says, if you don't take both, you're not getting either. And the guy said, thank you so much. You may do it. God bless you and keep you. Take care of those women who are our kissing cousins. In that way, through that marriage, God shows through the first fruits of Ruth's offspring that Obed is accepted by God into Boaz's family. And not only is she seen as a good Jew, she's seen as the great-grandmother of the best Jew of all, King David. You can imagine that in the court of King David, rumors flew. This guy who came out of nowhere, came out of not such a small town, but not a major town, Bethlehem, and he thinks he's going to be king over all Israel. It took 7 years for David to claim his kingdom because he had to go to each part of the nation and ask them to accept him as king. It took 7 years from the time that Saul died until the time that David was able to ascend the throne. And you can imagine the rumors. Well, I heard that he's a Moabite. I heard this. I'm not sure we can trust him. Can you see how this book would make it very, I won't say easy, would make it easier for David to be accepted? It tells the story. It raises the question and it answers the question in a way that everybody who reads it goes, oh, I get it now. I get it now. I get it. And so the birth of Obed is the continuation of Naomi's family where there was no continuation. It's a very nice fullness that God gives to Naomi. Because remember at the beginning, full, then everything's taken away, and then at the end, full again. It's a very nice metaphor. There's about 15,000 other things that we could talk about. Don't have time. But I hope sometime in the next couple days you can enjoy the book of Ruth. Take you about 25 minutes to read it, and it's worth it. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Thank you, Dr. Patrice, for some insightful meditations. I will let out one other secret that she did not let out. She not only mentioned our 2 grandchildren, but she also mentioned her own mother repeatedly. Because Dr. Patrice is actually Tamar bat Ruth. Tamar, daughter of Ruth. So it was a family kind of meditation tonight. Thank you for the wonderful insights. And she says there's many, many more. And we need to be thankful to the God who's so gracious to us as his people, the one who's so faithful. And one of the ways in which we do that is through the Psalms, particularly the Hallel Psalms. Now I'm going to ask our Hallel and Megillah readers to come forward at this time. It is traditional at the holidays to read the Hallel Psalms, so we'll read part of one of them this evening. As you will see, it's Psalm 118, and it contains, among other things, the introductory line to traditional Jewish weddings, Baruch haba b'Hashem Adonai. It was also part of the holiday celebrations during the temple days, and it's the way in which we will greet the Messiah. The rabbis of old told us, when you see the Messiah, if you should, greet him in this way, Baruch haba b'Hashem Adonai. Our people greeted him when he came the first time. We will get to greet him when he returns in the same fashion.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu likro et Hallel. Deserving of praise are you, O Lord our God, the ruler of the universe, who hallowed us by your precepts and instructed us to read the Hallel.
I'll be reading 118:19 through 26. Open the gates of the temple. I will go in and give him my thanks. Those gates are the way into the presence of the Lord, and the godly enter there. O Lord, thank you so much for answering my prayer and saving me. The stone rejected by the builders has now become the capstone of the arch. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous to see. This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. O Lord, please help us, save us, give us success. Blessed is the one who is coming, the one sent by the Lord. We bless you from the temple.
At various of the Jewish holidays, as Dr. Patrice pointed out, we have readings from different of the Megillot. Ruth is the one for Shavuot, and it's an interesting one. We'll read a couple selections, one part from the beginning, part from the end, and you will have heard the reflections on both these parts. But it's a book that brings together, I'm going to suggest, three themes in addition to what Dr. Patrice has already suggested. One is the inclusion of the Gentiles, as promised by the covenants God made to Abraham and to David. And by the way, Jewish tradition tells us that God made the covenant with Abraham on this day of Shavuot. And the ancient Jewish community of the Essenes, the community we will visit, the Dead Sea Scroll community this summer, celebrated what is called the covenant of renewal, the renewed covenant, also on Shavuot. Both of these things, as well as the covenant with David, intimated at the inclusion of the Gentiles. Another one of the themes, as you've heard, has to do with this delightful marriage, and the third has to do with the Messiah himself. And he's brought in by the mention, of course, of his ancestor David and of the Davidic line. By the way, the Jewish tradition also connects marriage and Messiah together as it looks forward to the time of the end of age, Yachar Yitayimim, the Olam Haba, the eternal age, which is viewed as the marriage supper of the Messiah. And then, in keeping with the theme of the Messiah, as Dr. Patrice pointed out, Boaz was viewed as Ruth's kinsman redeemer. A very interesting term, because in our daily prayers, we say, Baruch atah Adonai, Go'el Yisrael. Blessed are you, O Lord, Redeemer of Israel. But more than that, he's one who's kin to us. Hebrews 2 picks up on this theme and says, this is the one who became human, took on flesh and blood to become one of us, so that he could do for us what he intended to do for us, which is to liberate us and bring us back to our God and to the place of fullness, as Dr. Patrice pointed out. One other thing you need to know about Shavuot, and this is the final connector with the Messiah, and that is that according to tradition, David not only was born on Shavuot, but he died on Shavuot. After the blessings, which you'll find on pages 230 and 231,